Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here on this Saturday night. Figure I will wait a little bit to get everybody on board, a little chance to join us. I said a couple of nights ago that I might take a night or two off, and that's exactly what I did. Just needed a little bit of a break. So I figured with the weather kind of relatively calm for a day or so, I took the opportunity to do that. It takes a lot out of me to do all this stuff that I'm doing. So sometimes my brain just gets fried to a point where I really can't function anymore. So I've got my little downtime here. Delvin, you want me to go 72 minutes? Are you serious? I don't know if we have 72 minutes of weather going on. I'm seeing that there might be a problem with the live stream or not. If you guys are having problems, please let me know. I'm showing that I'm streaming okay, but I'm getting a bit of an error issue showing up. So if you could put that up in the chat, that would be great. Okay, so let me just say hi to David Fuller. Cynthia Guinyautis, yes, did take the time off, and I appreciate the sentiments. Thank you. Actually, I did get a couple of messages from a few folks, concerned because I hadn't done took 2 lives, 2 days off, which was really very nice, and I appreciate that very much. Again, just taking a much needed break. So let's look ahead at what's going to be happening. The weather pattern has changed to some degree. I think what we are seeing is that the overall primary pattern of the winter, which really began back in December and lasted up until a couple of days ago, really, has finally taken a breather. And that should not be a surprise to anyone. The pattern was stretched out to an extreme, and you can only hold onto that for so long. And usually 4 to 6 weeks is about as long as you can handle it as far as a stretched out pattern is concerned. And that's what's happened so far. And one of the things that I've noticed over many years of watching how winters play out is that in most winters, not all, but in most winters, you get this primary pattern that sets up, and then there's a little bit of a break where the pattern kind of goes slightly opposite of what you had to begin with. And then it goes back to the original pattern, although it may not go back exactly the same way. There might be a variation that's different. Maybe it's not as extreme in this instance. Maybe it was hard to imagine that it could possibly be worse in terms of the cold. Maybe the dryness of the relative dryness of the first that 6 week stretch, maybe that will be different in the second go around, should that materialize. And I'm starting to see a few clues that suggest that we are going to see this sort of first half break and then second half. So why don't we get to what's going on at the moment, because we do have activity now that the pattern has changed away from the east. We're seeing snow and threats for snow in places that weren't getting so much of it during the last 6 to 8 weeks or so. And we have winter storm warnings up tonight. These are the National Weather Service updated real-time winter storm warnings up for much of the northern quarter of Colorado, which includes Denver, much of southern Wyoming, back into parts of Utah. We have advisories in western Colorado and eastern Utah, and they extend southward also into parts of New Mexico and Arizona. Those winter storm warnings from northwest Kansas, most of Nebraska except the southeast, southernmost South Dakota, and then on up into parts of northwestern Iowa, southern Minnesota. And we've got winter storm watches also peppered up in the northeastern corner of that area, running up into the northern half of Wisconsin. And by the way, should mention that as of Thursday, 52.3% of the United States had at least an inch of snow on the ground. which was the largest snow cover that we've seen in quite a long time, and also the fact that there was snow measured in every single state of the union, including Hawaii, because it does snow in Hawaii at the big mountain, the tops of the volcano on the Big Island. Does snow up near the top there, and there was an inch of snow on the ground in every single state in the United States, and that hasn't happened since back in 2010, when it happened. Actually, I think it was around February 11th or 12th. This time around, it actually happened sooner. It happened on January 18th. So just shows you just the extent of the cold, how extensive it actually was. And, you know, we are putting down additional snow cover. We should mention also that we have winter storm watches up for parts of Idaho, rather parts of Northern California. We've got winter storm warnings up for parts of northeastern Washington. I didn't check to see if that includes Seattle here. Hang on a second. That's a little bit rare. I believe it does not include Seattle, and it doesn't. It's more for the higher elevations up that in the areas surrounding Seattle, but not Seattle itself. And we also have a number of high wind warnings up for parts of the Pacific Northwest as well, because of a storm that's coming into the Pacific Northwest. And that's another big change in this overall pattern, in that we are seeing storminess coming out in the western U.S. So let me bring that screen back up, and I'll pull up the satellite view. I started loading a few new satellite views now that they've switched over to the Go 16, so we can have these nice colorized shots here. And you can see here's a view of the Northeast with some patchy clouds over my neck of the woods, back over through parts of Pennsylvania. Got some clouds up also into parts of the Great Lakes and to southeastern Canada. I got to find out what exactly, you know, the bluish area is a reflection of. These are all these. The Go 16 is very, very detailed. So I'm going to have to do a little research here to understand what exactly, you know, we are looking at here. But here's the wide U.S. view, and this is actually a really cool shot when you look at it. Very, very with the colors, the way they look here. You can see some clouds over the state of Florida, the northeastern Gulf of Mexico, sort of that feathery cirrus that's developed there. You've got clouds up. Here's the system that's now going to be heading up into the Rockies and Plains, coming out of the northwest. And if you look up in the upper left corner, you can see the strong weather system that's just offshore the Pacific Northwest, and that's moving in. I don't know that that's snow cover, Raymond. I'm not sure that it is, because when I go to the wide shot, I can't really see, you know, there's more snow cover than that. That's shown up in New England and also around the Great Lakes. So I'm thinking that might be something else. Again, I'm going to do a little bit of research on this. But here's the cloud cover out in the west as that storm gets ready to move out into the northern Rockies. So we'll take a look at where we're going with this model-wise. And we've got the new GFS up, so we can take a look at that. I'll bring that up to the top. And we will also put the we'll put the full U.S. view, and we will put the precip on so we can see the rain and snow. And we will start at the beginning, which is always a good place to start. Okay, so here's our low. We've got low pressure developing in southeastern Colorado. For this evening, the area of snow that's in the western part of that state and through Utah, northern Arizona, southern Wyoming. That's going to start translating eastward. Now, with the trough in the east basically gone and more of a ridge position there, and the main trough now further west, we're going to see a series of systems run to the Great Lakes. I think we're going to see 3 of them in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. Here's the first one that's moving along. And this is going to be bringing snow up in that area that's was indicated with the winter storm watches up Low pressure moving into eastern Iowa. This may wind up being more rain for much of Wisconsin except the Northwest. That's rain for Chicago and Detroit out of this as the track of the low runs up into northern Michigan. The rain changes over to snow in the rest of Wisconsin and into Iowa after the low goes by Monday night. And, of course, in the east, after a decent weekend, we'll get into some clouds and showers. There's a warm front that will move through Monday night into early Tuesday, and then we'll get into some showers on Tuesday as the weather front moves on by. It looks like it might be on the order of maybe a half to 3/4 of an inch of rain. There is a shot of cold air behind this, but it's nothing terribly cold. It's going to take temperatures down to near or maybe a little bit below average. The next weather system comes into the northwest along about later Tuesday into Wednesday. You can see it here coming in. And that is going to translate into another storm that's going to come out of the Rockies next weekend. And that, too, heads up this actually goes to the western Great Lakes with the trough position as far west as it is. It's going to take a track even further to the west. And it looks like it brings a soaking rain here next Sunday into Monday into the northeast. And then behind that, there is a shot of colder air. Now, after that's done, that's when we start to get things start to become a little more questionable. We're now into the 1st of February. There's a third system that goes to the Great Lakes, and there's some colder air behind that comes into the east. Now, this may coincide with what could be the beginnings of that pattern turn. It's going to be hard to tell when it gets underway and just exactly how it's going to play out. If we remember from when we, in the past, going back a few months ago, how long and grueling a process it can be. It can sometimes take 2 to 3 weeks or more for the whole thing to play out. So we're going to have to just wait to see the seeds and how they're planted, and then we can kind of figure out how long it's going to take for any kind of pattern change to occur, assuming it does. And I feel pretty confident that we're going to see that. So why don't we look at the upper air, and then I'm going to look at the teleconnection indices because they are possibly starting to flash some clues. So here you have our jet stream now. You can see the trough that's in the west, that dip in the jet stream going down into Southern California. You've got a system off the northwest coast, which is why they have the high wind warnings up for parts of northwestern Washington. And you sort of have a flat west to east flow across the rest of the United States, which is accounting for the moderating temperatures that are occurring everywhere east of the Mississippi. And we're not able to get as warm as we otherwise would with a setup like this because of the fact that the air mass that came down was so brutally cold. I mean, it was wicked across the south. You had temperatures in the 20s all the way down into central Florida. You had temperatures in the teens and single digits across the deep south for lows earlier this week, back along about Wednesday, Thursday. And that air needed some work to warm up. And that's why we only managed to get to about 50 here where I am today, where perhaps in a different sort of setup, if you didn't have that brutal air to work on, maybe we would have gone to 60 instead. But no matter. There's the trough getting kicked out. And you can see, if you remember, by the way, how the pattern was when we had that strong jet running from the Arctic regions straight south into the lower Mississippi Valley, how different it is now. The flow is basically coming from west to east from the Pacific. The flow in Canada is rather weak and diffuse. It's not, it's bringing some colder air down, but it's keeping it basically confined to Canada and points north. A little piece of it does come down with that system in the east once it goes by through the Great Lakes. There's our shot of cold air. And then there's the ridge popping up again with the next trough. And then that swings along and moves out. And as we watch what happens later in the period, you start to see things in Canada, sort of a lot of different chess pieces are beginning to show up. And you're getting a bit of a polar connection there. It's not quite as intense. And this is now as we go into the 16th day. Whether it winds up looking like this or not remains to be seen. But you do have some semblance of a polar flow here setting up back through Canada. It still wants to show some more troughing in the west, a little bit of troughing in the east. Nothing, it's not especially cold in the east, but this pattern might be the beginnings of a change. I would be kind of, to tell you the truth, I mean, I would be kind of surprised to see it set up the same way. Now, here's the look from the run before for the end of the 2-week period, where it has actually a fairly dynamic looking upper air from the standpoint of cold air, with a vortex setting up into central Canada. You've got a flow that comes from northernmost Canada straight down into the northern Rockies and Plains. So this would be sort of the beginning of what could be the colder pattern change. But again, we are looking very deep into the long range here, and there's going to be a lot of volatility from day to day and run to run. So I'm not going to, we can't put a lot of stock into this at this point. But let me bring up the Teleconnections, and we can view a couple of interesting developments here that I've noticed over the last couple of days. And what we're going to look for in the coming week is how consistent is this, and how is it going to be changing from run to run? Because it does change from run to run to some degree. But two of the things that I've noticed in the last several days, one is the EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, which I regard as probably the most important of all of this, of all these teleconnections. This was the index that was strongly negative when it's strong during December and into early January. When it's strongly negative, that is a cold signal for the eastern part of the United States. And while it is shown to be weekly positive, okay, running up through the end of the month, it does start to go back to neutral and slightly negative as we move through the first days of February. Nothing crazy, obviously, but it is a change in trend, and the models have been doing this for the last few days. So we're going to keep an eye on that. The next thing we're going to look at is the Pacific North America Index, which is very strongly negative. Now, if you want the winter and the cold and storminess, you're going to want this PNA to go positive. And if you notice, toward the end of next week, it does spike up from very sharply negative to neutral for a whole day, then kind of spikes right back down. So it's kind of telling us that a ridge is going to try to build quickly in the west, and then starts to collapse. The other thing is, when we look at the North Atlantic Oscillation with an NAO, which is a measure, kind of gives us an idea of how much blocking there might be developing in the Atlantic. And as you know, I regard this probably of the three indices, this is the one that I view as least important. But the NAO is forecast to go neutral very soon, later this coming week, and then starts to go negative. It looks like it starts to accelerate negative as we move into the early part of February. That could be something that maybe that if that winds up being the case, that could be the element here that is a little bit different, actually a lot different than what it was during the prior 5 to 6 weeks, when the NAO really did not have any factor at all in the brutal cold that we had. It was all EPO and PNA. But maybe this time around, the North Atlantic Oscillation, maybe there'll be more blocking to deal with, which may lend to the argument that how storm systems evolve as we go into February and March will be different from the way we saw them evolve during December and into January. And in fact, the one big storm that we had, the blizzard, quote unquote, it was so strong, that low intensified so much that it actually caused the NAO to crash for a day or two, from strongly positive to slightly negative. So it basically became its own self-fulfilling prophecy. That was really the only time that we saw the NAO actually go negative in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So maybe, like I said, maybe this time around it's going to be a bit more of a player than what it was the last time. All right, so why don't we let's talk here, see what you guys have to say. By the way, one of the things that this warm-up is causing, for the rivers up here. I've seen pictures of the Connecticut River, the Housatonic River in Connecticut, and a few others in parts of the Northeast. Ice jams are going to be a big problem, as they already are, in fact, in many areas. So that's that's a consequence of all this cold air. I would, by the way, Joshua Pan, when you're looking at your models here, it would probably not be too wise, as you know, to focus on the specifics with what's on surface maps beyond the 8th or 9th day. I mean, we'll pull that GFS up 6 hours from 6 hours earlier, and when the next one comes out tonight, all three of them are going to be completely different. So, it's not a good idea to kind of get wrapped up in the surface features of the maps. Let's focus on the upper air pattern. I think that's more important with regards to the change back. I'm of the idea that it will happen. Jesse H, first time seeing me here live. Great, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Good evening to Adam Fitz and Gina Caldiero and Tyree Revival. This January is going in the trash, unfortunately, in terms of snowfall. That depends on where you are, Tyree. If you're in the Northeast, if you're in most of the Northeast, that is definitely not the case. And I would probably say if you were in the deep South, definitely not the case. If you're in places like Houston, New Orleans, seeing snow 3 times in the last 5 weeks, which is just amazing. They sometimes don't see snow for 15 years at a stretch. Baton Rouge actually had snow just twice, but it's the first time that they've ever had snow twice in one winter. Let's see. And I'm doing well. Thank you. I appreciate you asking, Raymond. Everything is good. Finally done with this cold virus thing that I had and was basically affecting everybody that I know. David Schwartz, FiOS Queens does not carry FiOS 1. I think it's only seen if you're in Rockaway in Queens, they have it. I know it is. They show it in parts of the Bronx. Check it's channel 1 or channel 501. So you might want to check those. Oh, by the way, next Saturday, I will be at the Lindenhurst Library at 2 o'clock talking weather on Long Island. So if you are watching this from Long Island, 2 o'clock next Saturday at the Lindenhurst Library. And I'll put up some more information on that on my Facebook page in the next day or two. Brandon Doherty, I thought a negative NAO was critical for blocking by retaining the cold. It's critical for blocking, it's critical for blocking storms from moving out, and it can be critical for retaining cold. Yes, but as we saw in the last 6 weeks, you don't need it in order to get snow. There are different ways to do it. And the big snowstorm that we had, in and of itself, because it got so intense, was responsible for causing the North Atlantic Oscillation Index to tank from strongly positive to negative for a couple of days. So it basically, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy from that respect. But you don't need it. If you're someone that's looking for snow, you don't necessarily need it. There are other ways to do it. And, again, the entire winter of 2013, 2014, which was peppered with 10-inch plus snowfalls along the way for coastal areas as well as inland areas, came with a positive NAO all the way through. So some of the big blockbuster events that you've had over the years, the blizzard of '78, the Boxing Day storm, and I could list a whole host of others. Those required the negative NAO because those storms stalled out. The blizzard of '96 is another one, and they were long duration, 36-hour events for many coastal areas. That's the primary difference between when you have the NAO and when you don't. Let's see. What is the live stream tomorrow? Will Joe Rayo ever be on the early weekday stream? Well, there are some time conflict schedules between us, and the one time that because of what we're both doing, the one time we are together able to do it is at 9 o'clock Eastern time, at 9:15 Eastern time, and that I do delve in on Facebook. So you have to catch the Joe Rayo live stream on Facebook. I'll try and get him on a YouTube live stream if I can, do some maneuvering. But that might mean pushing this live stream, the 6 o'clock live stream, back toward more like 7 o'clock or 7:15. So we'll give it a try. Maybe one day next week. We'll see where it goes. I'll be as accommodative as I can. Always Smiling wants me to check Europe. Absolutely. So just hang in there, and I'll check it for you right now. So why don't we do that? I hope, by the way, you got to spend a little time outdoors today because it was very nice. Although I was a little surprised at how breezy it was, at least by my way. It was quite windy at times, but that's usually the consequence of when you have a warm-up in the wintertime or, in the spring, for sure. So why don't we look at Europe's pattern? We'll put up we'll start with the upper air and go backwards. Let me just, and then we'll take a look at how much snow we're going to get from all this. So we've got this, fairly deep trough, an upper low that's sitting in the North Sea with a flow that's running from the North Atlantic, from Greenland on southeastward across France and into Italy. So this is a pretty cold pattern. But a ridge is going to be building into Western Europe before the next trough and storm come into Western Europe as we move through later this coming week. And then it's back to a ridge position over England and into Western Europe. Looks like a pretty big ridge there that builds. So this is 9 days out. So I'll go back now to the beginning. Let's see what it shows for sensible weather from day to day. And here we go. So I always Smiling. I'm just kind of curious as to how much snow you guys had over there over the last couple of days. But with this trough pulling out, you are going to warm things up a bit. So it looks like these next weather events, except in the highest elevations up in Scotland, look to be mostly rain for everybody as we move through later next week and beyond. And then, of course, you get into this ridge position. So actually things kind of quiet down a bit until maybe after the 10-day time frame. But I'd be curious as to, what kind of snow you had, because the models were, showing a fair amount of snow for England and Ireland. And I can't see, trying to get the snowfall map up. Nope, that's not it. Ah, there it is. Here we go. So there's your snowfall map for the next 10 days. And again, most of the areas favored are the highest elevations up in Scotland and also, interior Western Europe through Germany, Poland, easternmost France, the Alps and Italy, but the rest of Italy's fine. And then you get down into Eastern Europe. It looks like, snows of, more typical for this time of year as that upper air trough begins to pull out. Back in the U.S., we can look at what's expected snow-wise in the United States from this first system, and we'll go back to day one here. I did notice that for Denver, the Weather Service in Denver was forecasting basically a 4 to 9 inch snowfall, and here we have through the next 84 hours. So you see there the heaviest snows are. There's a band of heavy snow of 9 to 12 on the GFS across central Nebraska into northwestern Iowa, southeastern South Dakota. This corresponds strongly with where the winter storm warnings are, and you've got the model also producing what looks like 6 to 10 inch snows across the northwestern part of Wisconsin and in the upper peninsula of Michigan. Again, that's where your winter storm warnings are. A little bit up in upstate New York and up through northern New England, and then back up through the Rockies and up to the northwest. in the northern Rockies in northern California, parts of Oregon, and in through Idaho and northern Nevada. You're getting a peppering of snow there. We'll roll along to see what we get for the whole 10-day period. And again, these are models, so just bear that in mind. They're subject to huge changes as we go past the day 4 or 5 time frame. So do not use these as absolutes. But I think what you're seeing here is a basic reflection of the fact that the trough position has changed. The amount of cold air that's coming into the United States is much more limited this time around. So that's going to also limit to some degree how much snow falls and where it falls. Because you're not going to see too much in the west. It does show a fair amount of snowfall for parts of southeastern Canada and up through New Brunswick, so we can check Canada and see what's happening, because this pattern change does have an impact here. And you can see the GFS actually produces some fairly high amounts across much of Quebec and into Labrador, as well as western Newfoundland, and also up through New Brunswick. Not so much in Nova Scotia. So we'll see how the storm tracks are. Let me get back to the beginning, and we'll put up the surface map. So here's our system. This is what's going on at the moment as low pressure goes by to our north, and then we've got that Great Lakes low. So this actually produces some fairly decent snowfalls as that low tracks west of the Maritimes. So no ocean storms with this pattern, with that ridge basically in the eastern states. Everything's going to be coming in from the west. And here's that third system as we go deeper into the long range. Now we are into Tuesday, January 30th, and this looks like a significant snow and icing event that rolls up into parts of southeastern Canada and beyond, with low pressure moving to Labrador. So I suspect that, you guys are going to have to wait, for the Maritimes especially. Doesn't look like you have any big storms, any big coastal storms to worry about with this pattern setting up the way it is. And that would make a whole lot of sense with the trough where it is and the ridge where it is. So let me just bring myself back up to the front of the page. And let me come back to your chat board and see what you guys have been posting. There we go. And all right, so let me see. Hang on. Always smiling. Not very much, Joe. It was warm, then cold. People are dropping like flies from the Aussie flu. My brother-in-law passed. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, this flu season has been horrible. The vaccination that they had for it was only 32 or 33% effective, from my understanding. I'm very sorry to hear that. My condolences to you and your family. Where in Europe are you? Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking to Always Smiling. And let me just see. Joseph Mayano, is there a connection with the weather in Europe that affects the weather here in the United States? Well, Joe, blocking plays a big role depending on where the block is in the Atlantic. If it's an east-based block, in other words, if the block is basically from eastern Greenland eastward, that tends to funnel cold air down from the Arctic into Europe. And at the same time, it also allows a ridge in the eastern part of the United States to pop up when you have, that kind of blocking scenario. So oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes when the weather is very, very cold in Europe, it tends to be very, very warm in the eastern part of the United States and maybe colder out in the west. But there are other combinations depending on where the block is centered. If it's more of a west-based block, then that changes the whole profile in Western Europe, and it also changes the entire profile in the eastern part of the United States. And I have to tell you, up until very recently, it wasn't something that we paid we really paid a whole lot of attention to. The only time we would really pay any kind of attention to weather going on in Europe, or that we would hear about it, would be when it was an extreme nature. And then we would, you'd look and you'd say, oh, well, there's the setup in Europe, and that's why. I can remember a number of winters where, it was, very, very cold winters in Western Europe have corresponded with relatively warm winters here in the eastern part of the United States. But I don't have a lot of, practical experience of actually, paying attention from year in, year out. Now I'm starting to kind of watch it all the time, so I'm becoming much more aware of, the cause and effect. And let's see. Delvin, you're okay with 7 to 7:15 start. I will bear that in mind. Thank you. What site do I use for EPO connections? Hang on. I will give you, I'll put the link up here in the chat for those of you who want to check those EPO connections, the teleconnection indices. Here's the full page. And okay, so here's the link to the full page, okay? And here is the link. On that page, you'll see where it says forecasts of PNA, NAO, WPO. You would click on that, but I'll give you that link as well. And there you have it. There's the second link. So those are your two links. So, all right, folks, I think that pretty well wraps it up on this Saturday night. It's a Saturday night, so everybody should be enjoying themselves one way or another. So I hope you've got something planned. Let me tell you, by the way, just a little bit of, I guess, shameless self-promotion. And it was really a very nice surprise. And there's I'll put the list up, feedspot.com, which, I know there's all kinds of stuff like this. And, I'm always, it was really nice what they did. So here's feedspot.com. They ranked what they believed were the 100 best weather blogs on the planet, as they called it. And that link will, you can access any one of those 100 that you like. But I was very pleasantly surprised to find that I made that list. I was number 47, which was quite cool. And so you folks at Feedspot, at blog.feedspot.com, thank you very much. That was really kind of made my day yesterday when I saw that. And thank you. So, and all the other blogs that I'm on the list with are at that link, so you can check that out. Matthew Goodman, you did get here. You got here a little late, so you're going to have to watch it on the replay because we're about to wrap it up. Delvin says, I know a negative trough low cutoff in Greenland block in January gives a blizzard in Boston. What happens if we get it in July? No, it would not. No. Well, okay, let me just say this. If you get, and it's happened, where cutoffs have formed out in the Atlantic east of Virginia. There have been even a couple of instances of cutoffs that have dropped like east of the New Jersey coast, that they form and then they drop all the way south down to almost to between 35 and 30 north, and then they gradually warm, and we've seen tropical storms develop out of this. Not so much not in July, but it has happened in later months, like in August and September. So you could see that. Oftentimes blocking in the Atlantic, the negative NAO signature in the Atlantic can mean warmer weather actually in the eastern part of the United States. But it would also depend on what's going on with the PNA and the EPO. In the summertime, it becomes a little bit more, the connections are a little bit more convoluted because of the fact that the jet stream is pulled so far to the north. But generally, a negative NAO in the summertime tends to mean warmer than average weather in the eastern part of the United States. I remember that observation being made by someone a few years ago, and I usually don't pay attention to teleconnections in the summer because they really don't have a big relevant, they don't have as much of importance in terms of the forecast. In the wintertime, we're looking at snow, and that it has a, that is up kind of front and center in everybody's mind. So I'm looking at all these teleconnection indices. But as we get into the latter part of the spring and summer, it becomes something that I really don't pay too much attention to. But again, there have been instances of cutoffs that have formed along the East Coast that have dropped far enough south, because once you get south of 35 north, the water temperatures are warm enough for systems to become tropical in the summertime, late summer into early fall. Did we get blocking with the July 27th, 2017 nor'easter? Joshua, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back. I got to ask somebody that pays attention to this, to that sort of thing in the summertime. David Fuller, actually, there have been instances of hurricanes up the East Coast as they make their transition over into extratropical storms, ones that occur during, say, in the latter months of October and into early November, that have produced snows in some areas. In fact, Sandy was responsible for a very heavy wet snowfall that occurred in the mountains of West Virginia. Because of the system, when it became extratropical, became cold core in nature, very strong and very cold core in nature, and actually they did produce some heavy wet snows. So yeah, it does happen if it's deep into the hurricane season. You know, you wouldn't see it happen, say, from a hurricane in August or September or through the month of September, but when they occur in October, the latter part of October especially, and into early November, under certain circumstances, they can. But at the point that that happens, they've already ceased to be tropical systems, purely tropical systems. Okay, so let's leave it there. Delvin, tomorrow, live stream, you want a time? I would say, I guess we can shoot for 6 o'clock Eastern time. You know, I think that might work. If it winds up being different, I will schedule it on the channel so you can take a look at you know, if I decide to do it earlier or later. And Joshua Pan, yeah, the soundings were actually quite cold during Sandy. Once it made that transformation into a non-tropical, a super extratropical cyclone. All right, so let's leave it at that, folks. It's been great. Got my 2 days break. Glad to see everybody was here tonight. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of your weekend, and we will see you tomorrow. In the meantime, you can check out more on my Facebook page, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Meteorologist Joe Cioffi, where I've got some other posts and a couple other YouTubes that I put up of one of my colleagues. You can check that out. The website is meteorologistjoecioffi.com, and you can check out the latest website post there, including the one I did today on the long range. Have a great evening, folks. We'll see you tomorrow.